We also have to deal with environmental and ephemeral art, which is art meant to make a statement and then cease to exist. And this falls under sort of our conceptual realm, conceptual art or activist art. And here, this goes against everything we think of when we think of art. In terms of art, we want to preserve it, right? We want to preserve the paintings of Botticelli or the dome created by Brunelleschi. We don't want them falling apart, and yet that's exactly what they're doing here. So what they're doing is they've created a movement as an outgrowth of conceptualism and minimalism. They're taking the aesthetic of minimalism and tying it to the larger art for the discussion, art for the idea of conceptualism. And they're trying to create something that's going to speak to not just environmental concerns and in the environmental movement, but also against the gallery system. Because these are pieces that you really can't sell. These are pieces that a gallery doesn't want anything to do with, because as a gallery, I want to sell $1 million painting. I don't want to sell a $200 photo of a piece of art that you did somewhere and then it fell down because that's what it was meant to do. So it's a reaction against a lot of things. There's a lot of things coming into play. So we have the minimalist aesthetic or style. We have the conceptual idea of starting a conversation. We have the activist idea of environmentalism, all tied together in a package that is fighting against the gallery system. And we start with Robert Smithson. Now, he dies very young, age of 35, but he inspires a lot of people. He produces land art. And this is massive art in the landscape, the sort of thing that you can see from a considerable distance. And this is a form of art we really only see in the American West in this scale. And that's because there is so much land in the American West compared to so many other places in the world. And he creates this. This is Spiral Jetty. Now, the Spiral Jetty, Smithson did not make Spiral Jetty. He was not out there piling rocks. He actually hires someone to do it. And this is out in the Great Salt Lake. It's actually in this section of the Great Salt Lake because he thought that this red-violet coloration that section of the Great Salt Lake gets every so often would give it this sort of eerie, sort of sci-fi landscape. And given the images of the environmental movement at the time, where we're seeing images of the Cuyahoga River bursting into flames and environmental waste being dumped openly into rivers and that sort of thing, he wants that sort of otherworldly feel. He chooses the spiral because it is a primitive form. It's this very universal form, this very minimalist form. So we can attach any kind of idea to it that we want. We get that individual interpretation of minimalist art, and yet we have the discussion of both environmental and conceptual art because of that watercolor and the alterations that take place. And in this case, this is intended to at times appear and at times disappear. So the level of the Great Salt Lake changes. Sometimes the jetty is underwater and sometimes it is actually open. So he's trying to reference the importance of time, erosion, and the transformation of our environment. This coil structure is inspired by the growth pattern of crystals, yet it also resembles that primeval symbol, making the landscape seem even more ancient, even while it continues to look futuristic with that red-colored water. So this also brings us to the gates in Central Park. Here we're in 2005. And these are created by Christo and Jean-Claude, his wife. Christo is known for rapping. Not the fun kind, the kind that you do at Christmas. And he's known for wrapping buildings, islands, etc. And this project, the gates, consists of 7,503 gates, each with a saffron-colored panel hanging down from them, and spaced 12 feet apart. And these are set up in February of 2005 for 16 days. So very limited engagement. And he's doing that intentionally. He wants as many people as possible to come and see it. And of course, if it's a limited engagement or there's a deadline, that's going to draw even more people. It also makes it a more special event because it's not something that will ever be repeated in your lifetime. And the really remarkable thing is that timing, that February in New York, because you get these sort of gray feel to the earth. We don't have the leaves on the trees. The sky is, of course, frequently cloudy. And this is meant to give a certain sense of vibrance and rejuvenation to this otherwise incredibly drab, horrible landscape. Once this is done, they actually take the whole thing down after 16 days, and all the gates, etc., are recycled. The entire thing is paid for by Christo and his wife by selling the sketches and studies and bits and pieces of it to private investors, private people who are willing to back this project. But this is not one that's actually paid for by the government.